New York. Dr. Richard Stone, head of the Tropical Diseases Laboratory of Columbia University Medical Center, often remarked that the name conjured up a grander place than it actually was. In the early 20th century, when the laboratory occupied the entire fourth floor of the biomedical research building, crews of technicians worked to eliminate the scourges of yellow fever, malaria, and cholera. But medical successes and research laboratories in Nairobi and Sao Paulo had left the DL a much less important place than it once was. Now a fraction of its former size, it employed only 2 full-time technicians, and their primary concern was diagnosing illnesses of New Yorkers who had traveled abroad. The lab's comfortable routine was unprepared for what it was receiving that morning. "Ooh, very nice," the technician in the Tropical Diseases Laboratory said as she read the custom labels. "Partially masticated fragment of unidentified Costa Rican lizard." She wrinkled her nose. "That one's all yours, Dr. Stone." Richard Stone crossed the lab to inspect the new arrival. "Is this the material from Ed Simpson's lab?" "Yeah," she said. "But I don't know why they'd send a lizard to us." "His secretary called," Stone said. "Simpson's on a field trip to Borneo for the summer, and because there's a question of communicable diseases with this lizard, she asked our lab to take a look at it. Let's see what we got." The white plastic cylinder was the size of a half-gallon milk container. It had locking metal latches and a screw top. It was labeled International Biological Specimen Container and plastered with stickers and warnings in 4 languages. The warnings were intended to keep the cylinder from being opened by suspicious customs officials. Apparently the warnings had worked. As Richard Stone swung the big light over, he could see the seals were still intact. Stone turned on the air handlers and pulled on plastic gloves and a face mask. After all, the lab had recently identified specimens contaminated with Venezuelan equine fever, Japanese bee encephalitis, Kaizenor forest virus, Langat virus, and Mariaro. Then he unscrewed the top. There was the hiss of escaping gas, and white smoke boiled out. The cylinder turned frosty cold. Inside he found a plastic Ziploc sandwich bag containing something green. Stone spread a surgical drape on the table and shook out the contents of the bag. A piece of frozen flesh stuck to the table with a dull thud. "Huh," the technician said. "Looks eaten." "Yes, it does," Stone said. "What do they want with it?" The technician consulted the enclosed documents. "Lizard is biting local children. They have a question about identification of the species and a concern about diseases transmitted from the bite." She produced the child's picture of a lizard, signed Tina on the top. One of the children drew a picture of the lizard. Stone glanced at the picture. "Obviously, we can't verify the species," Stone said, "but we can check diseases easily enough. If we can get any blood out of this fragment." "What are they calling this animal?" "Bacillus or amaratus with 3-toed genetic anomaly," she said, reading. "Okay," Stone said. "Let's get started. While you're waiting for it to thaw, do an X-ray and take Polaroids for the record. Once we have blood, start running antibody sets until we have some matches. Let me know if there's a problem." Before lunchtime, the lab had its answer. The lizard blood showed no significant activity to any viral or bacterial antigen. They had run toxicity profiles as well, and they had found only one positive match. The blood was mildly reactive to the venom of an Indian king cobra, but such cross-activity was common among reptile species, and Dr. Stone did not think it noteworthy to include in the facts his technician sent to Dr. Martin Gutierrez that same evening. There was never any question about identifying the lizard. That would wait for the return of Dr. Simpson. He was not due back for several weeks, and his secretary asked if the TDL would please store the lizard fragment in the meantime. Dr. Stone put it back in the Ziploc bag and stuck it in the freezer. Martin Gutierrez read the facts from Columbia Medical Center Tropical Disease Laboratory. It was brief. Subject: Basilicus amaratus with genetic anomaly. Forwarded from Dr. Simpson's office. Materials: posterior segment. Question: partially eaten animal. Procedures performed: X-ray, microscopic, immunological, RTX for viral, parasitic, and bacterial diseases. Findings: no histological or immunological evidence for any communicable disease in man in this Basilicus amaratus sample. Signed, Richard A. Stone, MD, Director. Gutierrez made two assumptions based on the memo. First, that his identification of the lizard as a basilis had been confirmed by scientists at Columbia University, and second, that the absence of communicable diseases meant the recent episode of sporadic lizard bites implied no serious health threat for Costa Rica. On the contrary, he felt his original views were correct, that a lizard species had been driven from the forest into a new habitat and was coming into contact with village people. Gutierrez was certain that in a few more weeks the lizards would settle down and the biting episodes would end. The tropical rain fell in great drenching sheets, hammering the corrugated roof of the clinic in Bahia Ansico. It was nearing midnight, power had been lost in the storm, and the midwife Elena Morales was working by flashlight when she heard a squeaking, chirping sound. Thinking that it was a rat, she quickly put a compress on the forehead of a new mother and went into the next room to check on the newborn baby. As her hand touched the doorknob, she heard the chirping again, and she relaxed. Evidently, it was a bird flying in the window to get out of the rain. Costa Rican said that's when a bird came to visit a newborn child. It brought good luck. Elena opened the door. The infant lay in a wicker basket, swaddled in a light blanket, only its face exposed. Around the rim of the basket, 3 dark green lizards crouched like gargoyles. When they saw Elena, they cocked their heads and stared at her curiously, but did not flee. In the light of her flashlight, Elena saw blood dripping from their snouts. Softly chirping, one lizard bent down and, with a quick shake of its head, tore a ragged chunk of flesh from the baby. Elena rushed forward, screaming, and the lizards fled into the darkness. But long before she reached the bassinet, she could see what happened to the infant's face, and she knew that the child must be dead. The lizards scattered into the rainy night, chirping and squealing, leaving behind only bloody 3-toed tracks, like birds.